Dear students, welcome to our interview for Chapter 7 on this course on global transformation. We have with us today Frau Schlacke, who has presented her material on this chapter, and she's here to answer a few questions on that. Welcome.
Welcome.
Okay, so to begin with, you touched upon some approaches to work against these impediments that you mentioned. I was wondering if you could just briefly go into what the substantive, procedural and institutional laws might be, and some examples perhaps of these.
Yes, thank you for that question. In fact, I have to explain that a little bit more than I did in my lecture. First of all, what I explained in the lecture was the constitutional level, yeah? With the constitutional target, climate protection, and to write it down in the states' constitutions. The next level is the so-called legislative level, and that we can divide up into two categories, into a substantive category and a procedural category. The substantive category comprises stipulations, regulations, for example, with targets concerning the CO2 emission reduction. This is a substantive target. So what I mean with substantive measures in a legal sense is that you need legislative measures with targets, with instruments, and with controlling measures for the climate protection. That are substantive legal measures. And on the other side, you need also procedural measures. For example, a procedural measure would be to oblige the authorities to have a participation of the civil society. Another procedural instrument in Europe and in Germany is the environmental impact assessment. What we suggest in our report is that you need a climate impact assessment for any power plant, for any permission for a power plant, for example, or for offshore wind farms. So you have different procedural, legal instruments, and this is meant by the procedural category. And last but not least, you have the institutional level. And that means you have the authorities of a state, and these authorities, the ministries, the agencies, have to take into account climate protection. They decide about measures they want to take in future times, and they have to take into account climate protection targets. So that means that you need a climate mainstreaming through all the institutions you have in a state. And not only the executive branch, also parliament and the government. Okay. Government is the executive branch, parliament and the courts, for example.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for going into that. Next, I wanted to ask you what you think the risks are for this transformative legislation, perhaps.
Well, there could be some risks. I will give you an example. In Europe, we need more regulations for energy efficiency. There is no directive. There is a directive on the way, but there are different barriers and impediments so that we do not have yet a binding energy efficiency directive. If there is more energy efficiency regulation, there is some in special sectors, but not energy efficiency framework directive. If there would be more efficient measures, legally binding, we could have a rebound effect. That means that you, for example, you oblige enterprises to produce very energy efficient products, for example, refrigerators. You know these different classifications of energy efficiency when you want to buy a refrigerator, for example. Then you have a very energy efficient product, but at the end, the target to have only energy efficient products is achieved, but it is not for sure that the consumer will not buy 2 or 3 of these energy efficient refrigerators. So that at the end, if you sum up the energy efficiency of 1 old refrigerator and 3 very efficient refrigerators, you sum up and you will come to the same result. Yeah, no more efficiency. So this is the rebound effect, and this could be a risk for a very ambitious legislation.
Yes.
For the EU and in the member states.
Yes. So the energy that consumers save, they might expend elsewhere and undo all the good work, basically.
That it is. And to prevent this result, you need more instruments. For example, you can try to stipulate a sanction. Yeah, you can try to introduce measures that at the end you have a high price for an energy efficient product.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That could be measures to prevent such a rebound effect.
Yes, okay. You mentioned that economic sector associations have greater conflict handling capacities than socio-environmental areas. Could you give us perhaps some examples of this?
Yes. We concluded in our flagship report that the lobby of economic interests is much more stronger and more efficient than the non-governmental organizations. That is because they are doing their job since decades. Yeah, and I would say that the non-governmental organizations and the activity of civil society for a public interest that started in the 1970s, and it came up in the 1980s. So, a characteristic of the non-governmental organizations is that they are not so good organized, and they do not have this financial capacities the other side, the economic side, has to bring in their interests in the political decision-making process. So that's the main reason. But if a state or if a society wants to support public interests like climate protection and environmental protection, they have to pay for it. So that means that they have to give money, for example, to these non-governmental organizations and to support their activities.
So it's a lot more difficult for them on that side.
That's a lot more difficult for them to bring in their interest and the public interest into decision-making processes.
Yeah, so that's something that could be addressed, perhaps. Okay, for the next question, you, I think, touched upon the fact that citizens should be more involved in decision-making. There should be more democracy involved in the transformation. I thought maybe it'd be good to mention that education is obviously an important factor here, that people know what is going on so that they can make informed decisions. And I was wondering if this was your view as well.
Yes, that's right. Thank you for that question, which is very important because it addresses the part, the other part of the proactive state. We always say in our report that we need a proactive state, and we need also a broad participation of the civil society. So it is needed that the civil society is informed about all the measures the proactive state is taken. And it is needed that the civil society participate in the decision-making processes from the very, very first beginning of the decision-making process, not at a point where the decisions are already taken by the authorities. And last but not least, it is also important to give the civil society access to justice, to have the possibility to control the decisions taken by the state. Also, if it is a proactive decision in the sense of transformation.
Because these decisions will affect them ultimately, so they should have a say in it.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. We have these targets for 2020 and 2050. You also talk about interim targets. Could you perhaps go more into what these might be?
Yes. It is very helpful if you have a pathway and at the end you have a target. But it is more helpful to have interim targets. And that means, I will give you the example with the target to reduce the CO2 emissions in Europe by zero until 2050. Then you have to, now we have 2012, you have to inform also the civil society when will you achieve, for example, a reduction of 20%. When will you achieve a reduction of 30%? Will it be in 2020? Will it be in 2025? Or will it be in 2030? So you will give the civil society an idea how to achieve this very ambitious target. And that's the reason why we need interim targets. And that's one example how to set up these interim targets. You can do it with instruments as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so there'll be an important element in this too. Yeah. Yes. I found it very inspiring about how China is already developing these new technologies, these environmentally friendly technologies. Do you think we can perhaps take something from that and learn something from China?
Yes, I think so. I think so. We should have a very close look to what's going on in China. And we will realize that there is a very quickly and a very strong, or a very quick and a very strong development towards establishing renewable energies. And I think we could learn or can learn how do they manage that. Yeah. How do they organize that? How do they manage that? How do they finance that at all? That's very important. And beside, we can also study which conflicts are produced by this way of setting up renewable energies. And then we must take a look, how do they resolve these conflicts?
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to episode 2 now of your presentation, talking more about the EU. Do you think that this transformation really relies on the EU staying strong and united? Because we know at the moment there have been some conflicts within the EU. Do you think that could be a hindrance, and it's important for the EU to stay united in order for this to work?
Well, we have always conflicts in the EU, and we have there is nearly nowhere a consensus on a topic. If you ask the 27 member states. It is right, at the moment currently we have a crisis. We have a financial crisis, and that's on one hand it's interesting to study how they manage this crisis, and we do not know if we are on a good way or on a bad way. We still do not know that. On the other hand, it's a little bit, it makes me nervous that we concentrate so much power on this crisis, because in the opinion of the Global Change Council, we have to switch this or turn around this financial crisis into a transformation of the finance system towards sustainability. And there I recommend our next report to you, because there we discuss and we recommend how to make this turnaround of our financial systems in the EU. And we also have a global perspective. So I think it is a barrier and a chance at the same time, this financial crisis, also for this transformation towards sustainability.
Yes. And perhaps it could lead to a more united Europe as well in some aspects.
Yes, that was the other part of the question. Yes, it could lead to a more united sort of state, I would say, a sort of federal state.
Yeah, so that would be ideal. You talk about a common energy policy. Could you go into perhaps what that involves?
Yeah, that involves that we discuss and we decide the grids, so the energy grids. That's the first prerequisite to set up an EU-wide energy system. We have a lack of competencies on this sector, so the EU cannot decide where and how to build up this energy grid. So there we have to, we have to abolish this barrier and to give the EU the competency. Another sector is the energy mix. Also, the EU has not the authority to lay down the energy mix. And perhaps, for example, and to say in Europe, no nuclear energy. The EU has not the authority. It is the authority of the member states. And I think if we want to have an energy transformation, the EU needs the competencies for these sectors.
Yes, so the EU needs to become more powerful as a whole then.
More powerful, yeah.
When you talk about climate policy mainstreaming, does this mean that all countries have the same policy then?
It does not mean that all countries must have the same policy, but I would say that the countries must follow the same targets. So climate protection, carbon-free energy systems, nuclear-free energy systems. So these are sort of cornerstones of a common transformative philosophy. We call it in this flagship report global consensus. Yeah. So this is a global consensus, and we need this global consensus to bring up this transformation.
Yes. Okay. Competition in common internal energy markets. I mean, we know that markets are very much based on competition. So do you think that in the case of a common internal energy market, it will be a big part of that too?
Yes, I think so. I think so that we need competition, and this is a core element of our European Union, competition. And the liberalization of the energy systems is basically founded because of the principle of competition in the European Union. So we do need that, and I think the competition is not an impediment for a transformation.
Mm-hmm. So you think it will be a helpful tool, in fact?
It could be a helpful tool, and it is the function of the proactive state to set the legal framework for this competition. So competition is not, well, we do not have competition of in markets and off markets without a legal framework. We have this, or we see the results of more or less lacking legal framework in the financial sector. So there we have the result, and now they are producing the legal framework and the sanctions, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all these insights that you've given us. Maybe to finish off with, you could tell us what your kind of viewpoint is and how positive you are about this new legislation coming through for the future.
Well, I'm quite positive for the European Union and its member states. In this area, I know the legislation very well. That's why I can say I'm quite positive. We have to do more, but there is already a lot of binding regulations in the sector of emission trading schemes, in the sector of renewable energies, in the sector of energy efficiency. But how I mentioned before, there we have a lack because no framework directive. We have sectoral legislations, but not a framework which sets energy efficiency targets. So there, I think that is the area where the European Union has to do more and has to be more ambitious. It is the energy efficiency area, but we are on the way, and that I think when you read all the publications of the commissions, then you feel from month to month you feel very, very positive, and you think very positive because they have very ambitious targets for the energy systems and for integrating the renewable energies into the energy market, for example.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. I found the presentation and your answers to the questions very interesting. I hope that our students have also learned a lot from these videos, and good luck to you too, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for your very interesting questions.
You're welcome.